Let's hear it for Sovereignty Day. Absolutely. How many people out there know that the 9th is our 4th? That makes sense to anyone? The 9th is our 4th. It's a national holiday for us, and I'm so glad to see everybody here tonight. What a big event we've got, and it's so wonderful to see all these Mvskokes and all these people that are here in support of this story. I'm Jason Salzman. I'm the press secretary for the Mvskoke Creek Nation, and tonight I'll be emceeing. And I think just about all of us have that story of where we were on July 9th, 2020. How many of us got a story? We know where we were on July 9th of 2020. For Chief and I, Second Chief, a lot of us, we were right here in this building. And we were opening the computer and sort of hanging on every second with the Supreme Court's blog to see what happened. And it's a funny story for me. When it first drops, I click on it, and as I'm no legal scholar, I'm no legal person, but when I click on the decision, I go to reading the beginning, and thank goodness, Jean Hill Chaudhuri, our ambassador, knows what he's doing when it comes to legal briefs and documents, and he went right to where you could find what actually happened. And I would have taken probably hours to get to where we actually won. I looked down at my phone, John Adev is texting me, we won, like 4 exclamation points. And it was just so funny to me that I had to look down and make sure everything was good. But guess what, everyone? We won. Am I right? We won. And it was a wonderful day, and it's been a wonderful 3 years implementing and taking that responsibility on, doing what we have to do. I will say, in the face of lots of adversity, lots of people not wanting to see us succeed, right? A lot of people not wanting to see us succeed, but we soldier on. We continue on in what we have to do. And so tonight is about a celebration. Not only that day, but what it means for all of us. I'm serious. The 9th is our 4th. This is our holiday. And I'm so glad everybody's here to join with us in this day. First thing I want to do tonight is bring out from our executive branch, Second Chief Dale Beaver. Please welcome Second Chief Dale Beaver.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. I got a call about 3 o'clock from John that said, hey, I want you to speak at the play. I'm like, all right, sure. What do I say? It's up to you. So here it goes. July 9th, 2020 was a special day. We were right here. We were actually back in one of the meeting rooms, and we're getting ready to give a presentation at the American Indian Chamber of Commerce, if I remember correctly. And we're getting ready to actually go up to the podium, and we got the word that we had won. And so that speech went out the door, and we talked about something totally different that morning. And what we talked about was that the game has changed. We didn't know how, but we just knew in our hearts that the game has changed. And so fast forward 3 years, the game has changed, and it's still changing. It's evolving, actually, if you want to put it correctly. The game has evolved. It's a totally different game than it was 3 years ago. When I say game, it's the outlook. It's the perspective that we have on what tribal sovereignty means. It's the perception that we had whenever it means, what does the Mvskoke Nation reservation mean? And so it did create some unknowns, but when you have an unknown also creates opportunity. And so that's what we capitalize on, is the opportunity that the nation was given. And so for the last 3 years, that's what we've been doing, is protecting what we already knew, but also capitalizing on the opportunities that has given us. And so those opportunities range a full range of things, jurisdiction aspects, taxation aspects. When it comes to Indian policy, the Mvskoke Creek Nation doesn't take a back seat to anyone. Okay, and so we are known on a federal level now. When we walk into a room, people know who we are. They know that the Mvskoke Creek Nation is in the room. And so that's what really McGirt has done, is given us a voice that maybe was overheard by other tribes, that maybe ring more bells and have more whistles. But what we have is our culture. What we have is our language still. And what we have is our people know who they are. And so that's what today is about. It's about celebrating who we are. And so Jason said it correctly. You know, that our ninth is what would you say, Jay? Their fourth is our ninth. I'm gonna put that on a T-shirt. So I'm already trademark that. All right. So that's mine. That's mine. But really, that's what it is. We're celebrating who we are today. And so you know, 3 years ago, it didn't tell us who we are. It just codified who we are. What we already knew. What we already celebrated for millennia. And so we're glad that you're here today to help us celebrate Sovereignty Day. Sovereignty really is truly special. Once you give it, you don't ever give it up. I don't care if it's an inch. Because once you give up an inch, they'll want a mile. And so we are very, very selective. We're very, very careful that we keep fighting, that we don't give up anything. Because as soon as we got it, guess what? Somebody wanted to take it away. Somebody wanted to go back. Oh, let's go back to the way it was. We just got it. We didn't even know what we had yet. But people want us to give it up and go back to the way it was. Just because they were afraid what it meant. They're afraid of what we could be. The Creek Nation has never been afraid of anything. We've never been afraid of a fight. We've never been afraid of to stand for what's right. And definitely McGirt proved that we need to stand up for what's right. And so it's been a challenge. I'm not going to lie. It has been a challenge. But it's a challenge we face head on. It's a challenge we're not going to back off of. And so I appreciate everybody being here today for this play. It's going to be a wonderful play. I'm glad that John and Deb and MK brought the play to the reservation. We appreciate that, John and MK. And I know you're going to enjoy it, so I'm going to turn the time over to Chief Hill. Chief Hill?
Good evening. Before I get started, I did run into a couple of former principal chiefs. It's kind of hard to see back there. Chief Floyd, I think I've seen Chief Floyd out in the audience. Please stand and be recognized. Is there any other principal chiefs here, former? Chief Floyd over there. Definitely like to recognize him. As you well know, the McGirt ruling and Murphy started originally in his administration. So always look at the former chiefs as setting the foundation. And that's one of the things that me and Second Chief like to do is set the foundation for the next administration to keep it moving. I also like to recognize the National Council who are in attendance. Please stand and be recognized. I've seen a couple of them earlier. Speaker, Mary, Mark, Tom. And over for coming. And there's some former tribal elected officials from other nations, and I run into one earlier. Please stand up and be recognized. She's sitting right in the middle there. Again, as Second Chief and Jason had already mentioned it, it's one of the things that was passing out T-shirts the other day, and I said, anything you do, you get the T-shirt, wear it Sunday, take a picture and post it. Let's flood it. Today is Sovereignty Day for all of us. And there you go. There's John. At least got one. But you know, today, this marked one of the most special moments in the history of our people. When our Mvskoke Reservation was recognized and affirmed by the Supreme Court ruling, and I got proof right here. I don't know if the camera can show it, but make sure to wear that around. Since that time, we have faced many obstacles and opponents, as Jason had mentioned, to see us fail. And just kind of reiterate what Second Chief said. They want to go back the way it was. Well, we are. We're going back the way it was, 1492. So we can go back that far. But, you know, I want to thank Mary Kathryn Nagle for bringing the story of one of our fierce Mvskoke warriors and matriarchs of the world. Today we are celebrating because of citizens like Jean Hill. So enjoy the play, And when we think about Sovereignty Day, I ask you to remember those who came before that made it all possible. As it states on the Trail of Tears. And I always tell most of them that the Trail of Tears ended. Never no more we'll see that again. We're here. We're here to stay. We're not moving again. We're just going to grow stronger. So and God bless, and I want to thank each and every one of y'all. And I did see Joy Harjo. Please, if the lights, you could show the lights. There's a lot of individuals here. I've seen a lot of artists. All the artists, please stand up. I know there's a lot of artists out there. Please stand up. There's a couple of them. You know, enjoy. Again, I can't say enough. I seen this play when it first premiered, and get ready to get some tissue out. That's all I can say. It's great. So, Mado, enjoy.
Mado, Chief, thank you so much. And I want to thank Second Chief, too, for mentioning the 9th is our 4th. I'm going to go ahead and copyright that. So all of you that are thinking about maybe selling T-shirts or something, I'll beat you to it. Don't even think about it. No. No, great words from our leadership, and we've got so many, like you said, so many great people here tonight. I mean, literally the guest list is what kind of makes you feel like this is a big event. So we, like you said, Joy Harjo, first and only Native American to ever hold the position of Poet Laureate. It's awesome. I remember being up in D.C. at Library of Congress for Joy's big event up there, and just hanging out before and getting a chance to talk to her and pick her brain about songs she writes and poems she writes. And it's just, we're so blessed to have her as part of our nation and representing us. I also, MK, I was talking to MK backstage a little bit. We were talking about some of the folks here too. Is anybody in the room, I know the Osages had a big night, I believe it was last night, but anybody in the room excited to see Killers of the Flower Moon premiering? Killers of the Flower Moon, telling the story of the Reign of Terror that we always knew about, our brothers and sisters up north. But Lily Gladstone, who is the lead in that opposite Leonardo DiCaprio, is here with us tonight. Lily, will you please stand and be recognized for the crowd here? Throw up the lights. I'm like Chief, I can't see either, so thank you so much. Thank you so much. Thank you, Lily. Can't wait to see you on the big screen. Congratulations. Thank you for bringing that story. At this time, we're going to have a hymn because we sing. We sing at our events. That's what we do. We tell our story. We put our culture out there for everyone to enjoy. So at this time, I want to bring to the stage Anthony Hill. He's going to sing a Mvskoke hymn. Anthony.
I know it's God, oh me, Jejin, Halwet alo fanabi yakatis. I know it's God, oh me, Jejin, Halwet alo fanabi yakati meko sabalge o malgat skat halwet alo fanabi yakati meko sabalge o malgat skat halwet alo fanabi yakatis eyasketan o mi jejin halwet alo fanabiyakatis eyasketan umijejin halwetalo fanabiyakatis anugetskat umijejin halwetalo fanabiyakatis Mado.
I never met my mother-in-law, Jean Hill Chaudhuri, but I've read her plays. I've read her poems that she wrote on the back of McDonald's receipts, the letters she wrote to Congress, the newspaper clippings that recount her incredible life, her handwritten notes in the margins of Supreme Court decisions. When we lost her husband, my father-in-law, in the midst of COVID, I began the process of going through their house, and I was amazed at what I found. Woven into the boxes of advocacy and art, I found self-doubt. I found grief. I found a woman who struggled. Most know her as the first Native woman to receive a national award in the United States Supreme Court. But she is much more than that. She is a true Mvskoke matriarch. As an attorney who practices law in the United States Supreme Court, and as a Native woman playwright, I knew the world needed to hear her story. But mostly, I just love her. She has become my rock, my foundation, my connection to what it truly means to fight to preserve Native culture and sovereignty. Today, I am honored to share her story with you on Sovereignty Day on the Mvskoke Reservation. On the far end of the Trail of Tears was a promise. Forced to leave their ancestral lands in Georgia and Alabama, the Creek Nation received assurances that their new lands in the West would be secure forever. Today, we are asked whether the lands these treaties promised remain an Indian reservation for purposes of federal criminal law. Because Congress has not said otherwise, we hold the government to its word. On July 9th, 2020, the United States Supreme Court rejected the state of Oklahoma's attempt to extinguish us. On July 9th, 2020, the Supreme Court said we still exist. On the far end of the Trail of Tears was a promise, but we had to fight for it. I was born on the far end, but as an adult, as a mother, when I brought my children back, they were treated like foreigners in their own home on the far end. One time, Jonadev must have been 8 or 9, I was with my sister Richenda, and we'd come home to our reservation to attend Green Corn, the ceremony when our grounds celebrate the new year. But before driving from Tulsa down to Okima, we stopped to partake in our family's favorite pastime, eating at Coney Islander. I was watching my son devour his chili cheese dog when a young white boy approached our table. "Where are you from?" he asked my son. "Here." The white boy didn't believe him, so my son added, "We're Mvskoke." "You look Mexican," he told my son, and then walked off. I reached my hand across the booth and placed it on Jonadev's cheek. "Baby, don't you ever let anyone tell you this isn't your home. This is Tulsa. You know why it's named that?" He looked up from his chili cheese dog and silently shook his head. Tulsa comes from our word, Dolwahasee, meaning Old Town. Dolwahasee is where many of our people arrived after the Trail of Tears. Dolwahasee is where we deposited the ash from our ceremonial fires we carried from our homelands in Georgia, Florida, and Alabama. Tulsa is our home. Don't you ever let anyone tell you it isn't. Growing up, no one talked about the trail. I knew it happened, but my parents never spoke of it. Naturally, I did what any detective would do. I conducted my own investigation. When I was 5 or 6, I knew what was going on. Nighttime was when my parents told their secrets. Nighttime was when they told the truth. I would sneak out of bed at night and tiptoe across the dirt floor of the giant room where all my siblings slept and slip into my secret position beneath the front porch, where the old ones, including Daddy, would talk long into the night with Grandpa. My father's voice was so distinctive. Ni vi stongeza. Then came Grandpa's soft response. Boskagit, ajilani and boskagit omen. Somehow, one evening or early morning, more likely, I blew my cover. I'm not sure how. I timed my movement through the dead leaves perfectly with the roar of Daddy's laugh. Hayutki. Grandpa Scott always called me by my Mvskoke name. You didn't get much sleep last night. He had seen me. I think you spent more time under that front porch than in your own bed. I want to know what you know, Grandpa. I've told you everything I know. Corn woman, Nogazi, how Wootgo got his mask. I want to know about the trail. I know you were on it. He paused for a moment, then turned and walked off. Grandpa, come along now. And off he went to the river. He was well over 100 by this time, but you'd never know it by watching him. That man could walk faster than anyone. Guess you learn to do that when you're forced to at gunpoint. When we got to the river, Grandpa sat on his favorite stump, took out his chewing tobacco, and that's when I knew I was in for a story. One morning, I was 7, your age actually, with your energy too. Just like you, I never sat still. So one day, the soldiers arrived. They started shooting. The whites rounded us up like cattle and put shackles on the strong men. Along the trail, they separated us. I lost my mother and father, ended up with an uncle. The soldiers smashed the heads of babies against trees. Those who were sick were left or dumped. There was hardly any food. People were hungry, cold, and frostbitten. The whites roasted meat at night, and the aroma made you want to die. Each time someone fell, they sacrificed, saying, "Take my blanket, I'm going home." We couldn't speak, so we sang to support one another. Weena, weena, hey-o, weena, hey-o, weena, hey-o. Weena, weena, hey-o, weena, hey-o, weena, hey-o. Somehow, Hasagadamuzi was with us. Somehow, we reached Indian territory. There were very few of us, mostly older children and shackled men. There were no babies left. Hardly any women made it. I only had one uncle left. When we began, there were 500 in our group, but by the time we reached the far end, we had 50. I used to think that if I never talked about it, I could forget it. And then maybe the nightmares would stop. But I've spent 100 years not talking about it, and I hear their screams every night. These whites, you can't trust them. They don't know where their umbilical cord is buried. They got no idea where they're from. Promise me, Hayutki. I was 7 when we lost Grandpa. Mama cut her hair, then she cut Daddy's, Cliff's, Leon's, Halloween's too. Then she cut mine. Why, Mama? I like my hair. It was getting pretty long. Long hair is symbolic of knowledge. It records our history. But with every death, changes take place. We will place your hair with Grandpa in our medicine bundle. Your hair will be buried with him. Hundreds attended his funeral at Greenleaf. I did my best to dutifully eat my soft key and listen to the long line of folks who got up to talk, but suddenly I couldn't sit still. He was gone. I would never hear his stories. I would never again sit next to him by the river. And all these people were acting like it was their loss too, as if they knew him like I did. I jumped from my daddy's side and rushed to the nearest tree where I attempted to compose myself safe from the Oklahoma summer sun. Before I knew it, Daddy was standing next to me. You two were very close. He loved you very much. He's gonna be buried here at Greenleaf, yes. His umbilical cord isn't here. It's buried in our homelands. So he's going to be separated. His life began and ended in two different places, Hayutki. There's nothing we can do about that. Grandpa Scott made it to the far end, but he died long before the promise.
These spooky days, oh, get this go. These spooky days, oh, get this go. Oh, where dage, now. These spooky days, oh, get this go.
Bedtime, come along now, time for bed. Mama always interrupted us at the worst times. I remember those nights, the stick and glaze of our sweat and the sting of the mosquito bites. Trapped between Halloween's giggle and Mama's gaze, Daddy would tell the story of the Milky Way, opening a jar packed with fireflies at just the right moment for dramatic effect. And Mama would sing softly, almost under her breath. And us kids, we told stories. It was a competition. Each night, we competed to see who would be the best storyteller. And we were Creek, so we had some tough competition. Clifton was the oldest. He was truly in charge, and he would always tell stories of Jofi. Leon was next, and then there was my sister, Halloween, and me. Halloween was my only sister. She was my older sister, and I pretty much worshiped her. She'd fix my hair in the mornings if Mama was busy, and she'd help out at the store in town from time to time and earn a nickel or two. Every time she did, she always brought me back a candy. She made me a doll when I was 8 years old, made from fresh corn husks that she'd gathered in the field. I didn't have nightmares after that, so long as I slept with my doll next to my pillow. I said bedtime. We would all moan and groan and beg for just 10 more minutes. No. But Mama's bedtime stance was deceivingly weak, because as soon as Halloween spoke up, "Please, Mother, I was just about to share Corn Woman." She always let Halloween tell the story of Corn Woman. All right, one more. And then I would watch as my sister stood in the middle of our porch, her long hair flowing, her eyes dancing, as she shared a story our nation had passed from generation to generation for thousands of years. A grandmother would always send her grandson to bring back venison for their family to eat. And when he came back, he would see that she had prepared corn and beans. When he asked where she had acquired all this food, she would deflect his inquiries and state that she would inform him at an appropriate time. But then one day, curiosity got the better of him, and while his grandmother was out acquiring the food to feed him, he set off to look for her. He heard a commotion in the shed behind their house, and so he peeked through a crack in the logs of the shed, and he was stunned at what he saw. There was a beautiful woman shimmering in an aura of light. She was wearing a transparent gown made from fresh corn husk materials. Through the gown, he could see the profile of a beautiful woman. She held up her hand, and corn kernels were falling. She rubbed the side of her body, and with her other hand, from there too, corn kernels were falling. The young man was shocked, startled, and excited by what he saw, and inadvertently he made a noise. The earth trembled at the young man's discovery, and the beautiful woman transformed into his grandmother. She spoke to him. "Now you know. I have always been the provider and protector of you and your kin. But now you understand part of the mystery. And from here on, you will have to learn and find your way. You will have to cut my hair and put it in a basket. You will have to cut my body and put it in another basket. Take these 2 baskets into the field and spread my hair and flesh and remain 4 days and nights. There will be a storm. There will be wind, lightning, and rain, and then there will be darkness. Be steadfast and remain in the field. The grandson began to cry, but he obeyed his grandmother and fed the earth as he'd been instructed. It thundered and rained. Darkness fell. Thunder woke him near daybreak, and he was overwhelmed by the beauty of the day. The field was blooming in abundance, and a beautiful crop of corn grew all around him. Then he saw the youthful-looking grandmother, her long hair now the color of corn silk. She was spreading seeds of various kinds in the 4 cardinal directions. He wanted to approach her, but she signaled for him to stop. And then she spoke lovingly to him. Now you have to take care of everything and work to deal with the responsibilities that follow from your curiosities. Suddenly, she was consumed by a ring of fire, and she was gone. Halloween was 14 when she began to cough. Daddy tried to take her to see the doctor in ICYMI, but he refused to see us. Do you see the sign? My father hung his head. I can't read, sir. No Indians. Indians, that's you. No, that's the opposite of yes. You can't be in here. And with that, we were ushered out the front door of the clinic and onto the street. Daddy, what's Indians? Us. I thought we were Mvskoke. Well, to some people we're nothing. But don't you pay any attention to that. You're Nogazolgi, Bear Clan. Your people have medicine. We don't need men like him. Come on. Are we going home? To Oslanabi, our stomp grounds. Sometimes we went for green corn, ceremonial dances. And sometimes Daddy would take me to see our Hilashaya for medicine. I was what folks now would probably call a hyperactive child. I had more energy in my small body than most bodies could handle, and so sometimes Daddy took me to our Hilashaya for medicine. But this time, we weren't visiting Hilashaya for me. We were there for my sister. As they sat under the shelter of the arbor, I watched the hope fade from my father's eyes. I watched Hilashaya listen to my sister's labored breathing. He felt her pulse, and then he gave us the bad news. Traditionally, he said, Creeks, we had medicine for everything, every illness you could imagine. But then the trails separated us from the plants and roots we traditionally used. And he said with heavy hesitation, we do not have medicine for the white man's disease. My sister had tuberculosis. I didn't sleep the last 2 weeks of her life. I had to be there to say goodbye. Her voice softened, her muscles weakened, but she never lost her boya fikcha. Hayotki? Sister. She couldn't breathe, so she could barely talk. Tell our story when I'm gone. Tell the world what they've done to us. The most powerful storyteller I'd ever known left this world at the age of 14. I was 9. I ran into the kitchen and grabbed Mama's scissors and cut all my hair off until nothing was left. Mama just watched. My brother Leon followed not too long after. The TB filled his lungs and he couldn't breathe. He passed in just 3 weeks. No medical care, no treatment was offered. We just watched him die. Mama and Daddy had 2 more, Floyd and Richard, but lost them just months after birth. Mama and Daddy had 6 children in total, but now there were 2, my brother Cliff and me. I was 10 when the Bureau showed up at our front door. I was told I had to go. They had guns. Daddy and Cliff ran to the front porch to see what all the commotion was about and got there just in time to wave goodbye. Mama stood there. She watched the agent take me. But just before we turned onto the road, the last second I had to look back, I saw her collapse. She fell to the ground. That's when I started to cry. Hey, there's no crying in this school. You cry in this school, you get a beating. Do you hear? Do you hear? And then he slapped me. To most Americans, boarding school is a privilege. It's a place of white entitlement that might just get you admission to Harvard or Yale, maybe Princeton. But for those of us who grew up on the far end, boarding school is where they destroyed you. Welcome to Eufaula. My name is Ms. Snyder. I am your teacher. I am responsible for your civilization. This is your uniform. Wear it at all times unless sleeping, in which case you will wear the sleeping garments that have been assigned to you. You will go to bed each night at 9 and you will wake at 5. You've been assigned to the kitchen. Your job will be to sweep and mop before and after every meal. Now, have you used a broom or mop before? Ms. Snyder may have appeared slim and weak, but she kept many tools in her classroom. Belts, rulers, even a whip. I still remember the day she beat Noah unconscious. He was Choctaw, and he had a stutter when he spoke in English. This one day, she was yelling at him something in English, and he froze. He didn't know what to say, so he didn't respond. She hit him over the head so many times, I thought she killed him. He really wasn't the same after that. He just stared straight ahead. He had this sort of vacant look in his eyes. I think we all did. Ella Jean Hill, you will pay attention in this classroom. No more daydreaming. Now finish my sentence. When working in a white home, your job is to cook and clean. Very good, clean. By my second month there, I had learned the important words. Cook, clean, sew, wife, wash, birth, baby. I wasn't quite sure what exactly they all meant, but I knew I was supposed to say them. Context was always key. Now, which room is the most important to clean? They were preparing us to be maids in white folks' homes. Ella Jean! And then she slapped me. Janufki Donzi. Are you speaking gibberish in my classroom? It's not gibberish, it's my language. That's all I remember. Next thing I know, I wake up in the clinic, Nurse Johnson standing by my side. She was nice for us to hetki. What is this? Well, that's your cast. You broke your arm. Sweetheart, you've suffered an awful accident. They told you this was an accident. It always is. That's when I knew I had to escape. Run away. I didn't know how, not yet. I just knew that I had to. I was back in the classroom 1 week later. Ms. Snyder was sugary sweet. In her mind, she had won. Little did she know the entire time she was lecturing the girls in my class on how to wash white folks' Sunday attire, I was plotting my escape. Of course, the biggest issue was the distance. When they brought me here, it was an hour-and-a-half drive in the car, maybe more, but I'd be running on foot. It could take me days to get home, maybe even a week. I would not be the first to try and run away. All the others were caught and then beaten. The worst beatings are for the kids who try and run away. This was a huge risk, but I had made my mind up. There was no turning back. I would leave as soon as they took my cast off, and that took 6 weeks. I waited until a night when there would be a full moon. At dinner, I stuffed some bread in my pocket, wrapped in a napkin, so I'd be sure to have something to eat as I made my way home. I was in the kitchen mopping when Mr. Hunter came through. Night, Esther, Betty, Ella Jean. Well, good night, Mr. Hunter. See you tomorrow. I gave both Betty and Esther a nod. They nodded back and resumed drying dishes. I grabbed the key from the box in Mr. Hunter's closet, opened the door at the back of the kitchen, and I ran. And I ran and I ran and I ran until I couldn't feel my legs, and then I kept running. I ran in the direction of the river as fast as I could, but then I got lost. somewhere in the forest. There were so many trees and I couldn't see the moon, and then I made a wrong turn and that's when I heard them. The dogs. It couldn't have been more than an hour and they were already searching for me, hunting me down. They marched me back at gunpoint. I ran away 8 times. 7 times they caught me. I suffered dog bites, beatings, whippings, humiliation, and isolation, but on the 8th time, I got away. I made it all the way, running at night, 54 miles. I stepped onto our front porch just as the sun began to rise. At that same moment, my father stepped out, ready for his morning chores. Hayotki. My name, in English, means the blue early light of dawn. It was that morning at sunrise that I heard the first word in my language in over a year. But our reunion was cut short when the BIA officers pulled up in their black, sleek car. No dogs this time, but plenty of guns. Your daughter here ran away from the Eufaula Indian boarding school. One guy did all the talking while the other 2 held their guns, pointed at me. This is the 8th time. If she tries to run away again, we'll be forced to send her elsewhere. Do you understand? My father nodded. We need you to step aside. My father did not move. The officer took a step, but before he could come any closer, my father said, "Over my dead body." We all just stood there, frozen for what felt like an eternity. Then they quietly walked back to their car. They drove away. My father turned to me. You come from a long line of warriors, Hayotki. My father, your grandfather Elmer, fought alongside Chito Harjo in the Snake Rebellion when Oklahoma tried to eliminate us. And his father, my grandfather, fought alongside Obith Yahola in their civil war when we fought against slavery in the Confederacy. And my grandfather's father, your great-grandfather, great-great-grandfather, was just a kid at Horseshoe Bend. Lost almost his entire family when Jackson teamed up with the Cherokees and slaveholding Creeks to attack us, the Upper Creeks. They outnumbered us 3-1, but our warriors fought to the bitter end. And after Jackson won, he rounded up all the Upper Creeks he could find, locked them in a barn, set it on fire. You could smell the burning flesh a mile away. Somehow, my great-grandfather managed to escape. Never be afraid to fight. If our grandparents hadn't, we wouldn't be here today. We wouldn't exist.
Jihoto Chazade Jina
After surviving boarding school, it seemed as though life had returned to normal for our little family. We welcomed my little sister, Richinda, and instead of 2, Cliff and me, we were now 3. We had very little money, so instead of going to school, Richinda, Cliff, and I helped out where we could, picking vegetables, cotton, and pecans on farms across Oklahoma within a day's buggy ride. We even had a few pecan trees on the 40, our family's allotment, that we picked and sold at the market. Picking pecans was hard work. We had to climb the branches and shake them loose. Pay was by piecework. It was 1948, and there was a general feeling that with the victory in the war, the last vestiges of the Great Depression would be wiped out. One day, we arrived home on our horse-sled buggy to find a white family on our land carrying bags of picked pecans to their car. Daddy jumped out of the buggy and demanded that they leave the pecans they had picked from our lands. Instead of leaving, the man shoved Daddy, their little boy punched Cliff, and the wife took off her high-heel shoe and smashed it into my head. I immediately tackled her, taking her to the ground. Get off our land now. She looked at me, laughed, and then said, your land, honey. This is Oklahoma. You're standing on our land. So I nailed her. I punched her so hard my father had to pull me off of her. And then they left with our pecans. And they were never arrested or charged with the crimes of trespass, theft, or assault. 2 weeks later, I was walking home when I could smell the smoke long before I could see it. When I got home, Mama was standing in the yard clutching Cliff and Rachinda. They were covered in soot and sweat. "Where's Dad?" "Out back." "Out back?" "He ran to the well." My dad, of course, was trying to put the fire out, but that was an impossible task. We'd had a drought that summer. A lot of corn had died, and now our home was consumed in a fire. Was it a prairie fire? That's possible. Was it the white family I beat to the ground for stealing our pecans? That was also possible. Daddy put all of us, Mama, Cliff, Rachinda, and me, in the buggy. "Daddy, where are we going?" "Tulsa." And away we went, leaving the 40 behind in the dust. There we were in Tulsa, Dolwahasee, Old Town, where we deposited the ashes from the ceremonial fires we carried on the trail. We moved from place to place, often getting kicked out because we couldn't afford to pay our rent on time, despite the fact that both my parents worked as hard as they could. Daddy drove taxi cabs, sometimes for more than 12 hours straight, and Mama worked at hand laundries, washing rich folks' clothes. They enrolled me in Will Rogers High School. My English was not great. I had not been to school since escaping the tortures of the Eufaula Indian boarding school, and my white classmates tormented me constantly on account of my skin tone and my broken English. I was called the N-word almost daily. Finally, one day I couldn't take it. On that day when Susie Johnson spit on me and called me the N-word, I punched her in the face, and I broke her nose. My mother was infuriated. "Ella Jean, you've been expelled." She called me "Baby, they're always going to call us that no matter how hard you hit them." Why? Because they can. They moved me to Central, and the same thing happened. Every day, I was called the N-word. I tried to restrain myself, but after the 10th or so time, on that fateful day in January when I was confronted by Caroline Baker in the snow, I hauled off and slammed her into the ground, and when my fists and rings were done with her face, she needed 10 stitches. And I was once again expelled. I couldn't handle my mother's tears, and I decided my troubled existence was causing her too much pain. So the 17-year-old me did what the 10-year-old me had done just 7 years before. I ran. Only problem is I had no idea where I was going. I just knew I had to run. I had no plan. So when the truck pulled over by the side of the road, I jumped in. I'd never been to the city. I'd heard about it. It was huge, largest city in Oklahoma. Not as fancy as Tulsa, less oil and more cows. But it was the 50s, and the city was expanding, creating suburbs that would soon stretch for miles. I, of course, didn't live out there. I didn't have a penny to my name. I was 17, and I knew no one. I got a job at a furniture store putting red stain on wood for a man named Mr. Henry. Months went by. I wondered if I should write my family. Did they wonder whether I was still alive? I missed our little Indian Baptist church out in Okima. I missed our chuco flaco. I missed staying up all night and shaking shells around the fire. I missed my mom. I remembered her smell, the smell of our home. My mom was cooking her sofkey. My father's sweat when his excitement from a story caused him to perspire. I missed the stump by the river where Grandpa used to sit. I missed my little sister, Rachinda, my brother, Cliff. I missed my life. I began to drink. I found a bar that I chose for its proximity, not ambiance. It was rough, the kind of place where no one swept the blood or glass off the floor from the night before, where the wrong word would get you stabbed, but they served 17-year-olds, and somehow I felt safe. No one slapped me if I didn't speak English. Somehow, in this bar of society's misfits, I felt free. I was there by choice, and that was a freedom I had been forced to fight for. I still remember the night when I walked in and saw him standing there behind the counter. Hola. Hola. Uno cerveza. Gracias. Como esta? Está. Como está? I'm sorry, but yo no, I don't speak Spanish. You don't, do you? No. Then why are you speaking Spanish to me? Well, because you spoke Spanish to me. I'm Indian. Me too! From Calcutta, India? So you're the reason everyone calls us Indians. Well, don't blame me, blame Christopher Columbus. He's the one who got lost. There we were, 2 Indian runaways drinking beers at a dirty dive in downtown OKC. We were immediately inseparable. Each night we'd cook in his tiny apartment and we'd introduce each other to a new food. He taught me to make the most complicated of curries, and I shared my mother's recipe for Creek dumplings. One time, I just realized that we knew more about each other's diets than each other. I decided to ask him, we're both running, you and me. What are you running from? I asked you first. I was 14 during the riots, when the British were making their careless colonial exit. For days, the streets were full of blood and carnage. One morning, a Muslim family came running into our yard asking for protection. Dad took them to the garage and shut the door and told them to remain there. But then early the next morning, they tried to escape. A gang caught them on the street just east of us. I saw their dead bodies with bloodied and bashed in heads just 20 feet from our house. After that, I told my mother I had to leave. I couldn't stay. I told her I had applied and been accepted to a school here in the States. She cried. She wouldn't look at me for 2 days straight. Then she sold all of her most precious jewelry to buy me a ticket on a boat to the United States. What are you running from? School. Forget school. That's the last thing you need. You're a brilliant, beautiful woman whose very existence challenges the foundations of an incredibly colonial country. One morning, when the world was dark and the ground was frozen, we both woke to the sound of loud knocking at our front door. I opened the door, and there to my shock stood my parents. I hadn't seen them in over a year. I didn't know what to say. Daddy cried, Mama yelled. Apparently, they took the bus to Oklahoma City, and for 2 days straight, they walked the streets asking any Indian they saw if they knew me, until they found someone who did, who told them where I lived. Mama barged right in, nearly knocking Joy to the ground. You've been gone for a year, and this is who you're living with? His name is Joy, Mama. Your brother Clifton. Now, he's dating a nice girl in Bixby. I'm not in Bixby, I'm in the city, and I'm dating the man standing next to you. Is he Christian? He's Hindu. That was it. She decided I was going to hell. You have made your bed and now you can lie in it. And with that, she stormed out of my apartment, letting the door slam behind her. My father turned to me before he left. I told you, never be afraid to fight. Never thought you would fight us, your family. And then he left, and I melted into the couch where I stayed for days. Joy was very sweet and did what he could, but I was despondent. What did your parents say when you told them you were dating me? I haven't told them yet. You haven't told them. You didn't tell yours. I hadn't seen them in over a year. You write to your mom every week. My parents expect me to have an arranged marriage to a Bengali in my caste. They would be upset if they found out about us. Yeah, well, my parents aren't exactly thrilled about us either. That's when I knew we had to be married. Married? What's the point of this, the pain, the suffering, if we aren't married? Marriage is a serious commitment. So either you're willing to make the commitment to me or you aren't. Well, that sounds like an ultimatum. It's a decision, and you need to make it. It was an ultimatum, but it didn't take him long to figure it out. That night, he told me he would marry me. We found a reverend who would marry an interracial couple. In Oklahoma in the 1950s, this was a big deal. And so in 1957, at the age of 20, I was married to the love of my life, Joyeth Paul Chaudhuri. For those of us born and raised on the far end, marrying outside of Creek Nation was simply unthinkable. I had married the man of my dreams, but he was not Mvskoke. I had betrayed my family, perhaps also my nation. On the far end of the Trail of Tears was a promise, and I had just broken it. Time went by, and I got used to the silence from my family, or so I told myself. We were happily married, and we immediately started trying to have a baby. But month after month, my period continued to return. Soon, Joy would say every time I emerged from the bathroom in tears. Joy graduated with his PhD and was hired as faculty teaching political science at OU. I had no idea what I was in for. I had no idea I would have to go to so many parties. At first, I was intimidated since I barely had my GED, but after a party or two, I figured out how to play their game. One night, I was at one of these parties, this one hosted by the anthropology department, AKA a group of white guys telling you they have a PhD in your culture. When this very drunk professor pinched my ass and walked off, I was shocked. People did not behave this way at the churches or the ceremonial grounds where I grew up. So I walked up to where he was standing and discussing his scholarship in comparative cultures and ritualistic practices. I stood behind him, reached under his crotch, grabbed his balls, and I yanked hard. He screamed and spilled his cocktail all over his tie and suit. I smiled and spoke to the entire circle around him. Thank you for teaching me about your rituals. I'm so honored to partake. He was so embarrassed he left the party. I kept myself busy, but if I was being honest, I really missed my family. I thought perhaps they might never speak to me again. So when my brother Clifton called, I didn't know what to say. Next week, in ICYMI, we have a right to elect our own leaders, and we're going to fight for it. When Oklahoma became a state, Congress passed a law forbidding us from electing our own leaders. Since 1907, the United States president had hand-selected our principal chief. But now my brother and our family were leading the fight to restore our right to be a democracy. This fight, it's everything we've ever fought for. Everyone's gonna be there. Greenleaf, Abika, Hickory Ground, Mama and Daddy. Yeah. Come on, Jean, we need you. Well, they're not talking to me. Pretty sure you're not talking to them. Does it matter? It doesn't. This ain't about you, and it ain't about them. It's about our nation. It's about our right to be Mvskoke. Joy and I got on the bus. And after 3 hours of flat fields and much anticipation, we walked into the convention. The room was packed. I saw elders, cousins, children jumping and playing. I even saw our Miko and Hilashaya from Aslanabi. And my brother, Clifton, standing behind that small wooden podium, or at least it looked small behind his towering 6'4" stature. The entire room went silent. We hung on his every word. We have been 50 years without representation, and we do not want a drugstore Indian for a chief. We want a free election, a free voice, just like any other tribe. The room exploded in applause. We're one of the oldest democracies in the history of mankind. That is what we are fighting for. We are fighting for our right to be Mvskoke. The room exploded in applause. Amidst the screams and applause from my brother's speech, I felt a hand take mine and realized it was my dad's. With tears in his eyes, he whispered, "Ijino Gijez, I love you." It was then that I realized I had to write a play. I wanted to find a way for my generation and the generation after me to come to terms with the trail. I thought maybe, just maybe, if we could do a play about it, then we could put it behind us, and then we could finally be at the far end instead of stuck on the last mile. I wrote the script, which was a combination of scripted text and improvisation from the various company members. Many of us were Mvskoke, but some were Comanche, Ponca, Cherokee, Chickasaw, Osage, and Seminole. On the day of the performance, we were nearly sold out. I couldn't believe it. I looked out around me and almost the entire auditorium was full. We each came on stage and shared a story. We all had a trail. We all lived on the far end. When the curtain came down, the audience leapt to their feet. I was in a daze. There were so many tears, hugs, everyone wanted to shake hands. Suddenly, I didn't remember where I was. Joy found me. I could see the worry in his eyes. "Jean, let's go home." Joy says after that I was uncommunicative. He says I kept wandering off, and at one point he found me in the yard next to our apartment, digging. All I remember is the profound sadness. I couldn't breathe. I don't know if Joy called my family or if they called him, but suddenly my brother showed up. "Jean." I didn't respond. I couldn't. "What did you do to her?" Joy didn't understand why my family blamed him, but my brother was livid. "Look at her. Look at her. This isn't my sister. What did you do to her?" My family agreed with Joy to have me committed to mandated psychiatric counseling at a hospital in Norman. I was heavily medicated. Once the medicine hit, the fog lifted, and I no longer felt as though I was drifting, or as though I was drowning. But then a new fog settled in. I was heavily sedated. I think if I'd had to rely on the medicine alone, I would have never recovered. I was assigned a doctor, an older gentleman from Cuba studying at the University of Oklahoma and completing his residency. The first day he saw me, he took one look at me and said, "I've seen that sadness." "I'm not sad." "You're not." "I've never cried. I haven't shed one tear." "So you're brave." "Look, obviously I'm troubled, or I wouldn't be sitting here in front of you taking your 18 different drugs asking for your help, but I am not sad. I am anything but sad." My mother had that look. She tried to escape before the revolution, but the army attacked our village. Our village was home to families of the rebels. I lost my father, my sister. My mother lost all her children except me. I'm very sorry. That's awful. Your body has shut off because your soul feels it deeply. So deeply, your body thinks the pain might kill you because it happened to your people, because it still happens to your people. But you have to harness the pain. If you don't, it will harness you. I came home 1 month later, a new person. Somehow I knew the trail would always be there, but it would not be in control. It would fuel my work, not impede it. I still remember the day Joy brought me home to our apartment. He planned a welcome home party. He'd baked a cake, he put up a banner, but the moment we stepped inside, he was in tears. "Babe, honey, what's wrong?" He was shaking. "Promise me you'll never leave me again." I was 27, and my biological clock was ticking. Not only had I not married a Mvskoke man, I had failed to give my parents a Mvskoke grandchild. But mostly, I just wanted to be a mother. After 7 years of trying, I was ready to give up. I saw doctor after doctor. They all told me the same thing. Keep trying. Keep trying? Don't give up. What if something's wrong? Oh, it all looks good to me. Nothing's blocking those tubes in there. Then why am I not getting pregnant? Sometimes it just takes time. How is it that the daughter of a woman who gave birth to 7 children can't even conceive one? I broke down. I called her crying. Mama, oh baby, it'll come. When? The Lord has a plan. What if I can't? Nonsense. What if it stops with me? Ella Jean Hill, your umbilical cord is buried on the 40 where you were born. Your blood, our blood, is in Mother Earth. We are the carriers of generations to come. Trust yourself, Hayatki. Your baby will come. Our son was born on September 26, 1965. We named him Joydev Mahagi Chaudhuri. Joydev is the name of the first poet in the Bengali language as it emerged from Sanskrit and Bali. And Mahagi in Mvskoke means someone who has been waited for a long time. Joy and I waited 8 years together to have a child. He was nothing less than a miracle. 2 weeks after our son was born, I received a call from Mama. Oh, Mama, he's adorable. He hardly cries, he just smiles, and he poops a lot. Did we poop that much? I just don't understand how such a tiny thing can generate this much poop. Where does it all come from? But then all I heard was silence. Mama, 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 what's wrong? Your father died last night in his sleep. I was not prepared for the loss of my father. He was my rock, my foundation, my connection to our culture, to my past. He was my connection to who I am. I simply had not imagined living in a world without him. He spent his final years in this world fighting for our right to be Mvskoke. And 7 years after he passed, we won. After 13 years of demands, speeches, petitions, letters, rallies, and meetings, the United States recognized our inherent right to elect our own Mvskoke government. On the far end of the Trail of Tears was a promise. We buried Daddy on the far end, next to my umbilical cord.
These spooky days, oh, Mvskoke. These spooky days, oh, Mvskoke. Oh, Guedage, Abiana. These spooky days, oh, Mvskoke.
Mama came and stayed with us for a while, and then she left and drove back home where she lived alone in Tulsa. Joy was offered a job teaching at Florida State University, and I couldn't pass up the opportunity to truly go home to our ancestral homelands. We decided to move to Tallahassee. Tallahassee is yet another variation on the Creek word Dolwahasee for town. From Tulsa to Tallahassee, I had come full circle, but Florida was the deep South, and racism was alive and strong, and no one knew what to do with us. We were not white, and we weren't black. We were brown, but we weren't Mexican. I was Native, Joy was South Asian Indian, and Joy Dev was both. Enrolling Joy Dev in school was impossible. He couldn't go to the white school because he wasn't white, and they refused to enroll him in the black school because he wasn't black. And mind you, this was 15 years after the Supreme Court decided Brown versus Board of Education. Voting rights was a huge issue. One day I was at a march in Quincy when several folks approached me and encouraged me to run for city council. I talked it over with Joy. It was no easy decision, but I am simply unable to turn down a challenge. So I went for it. I gave birth to our second miracle, Jonadab, in the middle of the campaign. Joy suggested I take the week off to rest and recover, but we were less than a month from the election and I couldn't afford to stop. So I took Jonadab with me. Jonadab Osceola Chaudhuri. Folks in Florida name everything after Osceola without understanding who he was or what he fought against. Them and their occupation of Seminole lands. My sister Richenda moved in with us along with her son Lance. In Mvskoke culture, your mother's sister is also your mother. To my boys, Richenda was Mama G. And to Lance, I was Mama G, and truthfully, without Richenda, I could not have done it. She watched Jonadab while I continued my campaign, but sometimes I brought him with me. He was a real natural on the campaign trail. He would coo at just the right time, and everyone wanted their picture with him. Then 2 days before the deadline to submit your name for placement on the ballot, 2 random candidates added their names. A white lady whose stated positions were similar to mine, but she was white, and a young black man. The night before the election, he showed up at our front door drunk as a skunk and sobbing. Richenda opened the door and offered him a seat on our couch. Apparently, he'd been paid money to run against me. He said a very rich developer was concerned that if I won, I would prioritize the community's needs over their profits. I put my arm around him and just said, money is their weapon. Don't let them use it against you. In the end, we both lost. The white lady won. After I lost, Joy was offered a job teaching at the University of Arizona in Tucson. Once again, we were moving. I thought I would hate Arizona, but I came to love it. My 2 boys would know other Native kids growing up, something I very much wanted to be a part of their upbringing. Of course, our oldest, Joy Dev, at the age of 7, listened to a Beatles album and immediately decided his name was Paul, not Joy Dev. Paul also decided that his younger brother was John, not Jonadab. When I asked why he did not prefer his original name in Bengali, he asked me if I was concerned that he and his brother might be mistaken for members of the band. My sister Richenda moved in with us at first, but then she decided to move back to Oklahoma. My boys were upset, destroyed. Lance was a brother, and Richenda, well, she was Mama G. I tried to explain to them, when you're from the far end and you leave, all you ever want to do is go home. One day, I got a call from the principal at the elementary school where John was in 2nd grade. Your son punched Tommy Thompson in the face and he's missing a tooth. My goodness. Your son's been suspended for 1 week's time, and your husband should consider paying for the surgery. They're planning to sue you. When John got home from school that afternoon, I was prepared to scold him. Your teacher says you punched a kid. I did. Well, your teacher says this kid lost his tooth. He did. What did I tell you about fighting at school? He called me. Baby, I beat up plenty of white girls back in my day. Anytime they called me the N-word, I just let them have it. Am I in trouble? No. I always want you to be able to defend yourself. Joy put $40 in an envelope addressed to the Thompsons with a note that read, for the surgery, if your son calls my son the N-word again, he'll be missing more than just a tooth. We never heard from them again. I made friends in Tucson, but mostly I did what I always did. I started organizing. I founded an organization, the Traditional Indian Alliance. We worked with urban leaders, urban Indians, tribal leaders, even upper and middle class white medical workers who wanted to provide medical services. All of this was terribly exciting, but over time, I witnessed community after community member dying from diseases that were entirely treatable. At that time, if you lived in a town like Tucson and you went to the hospital, they refused to treat you. They told you, you have to go to an IHS hospital because you're Indian. But IHS hospitals are on reservations. They are not in downtown Tucson. I was watching elders, children, parents. I was watching natives die from diseases that could and should be treated. It was my brother Leon. It was my sister Oloween all over again. Something had to be done. So, when I was at a conference where Emory Johnson, the Assistant United States Surgeon General and Director of Indian Health Service, was speaking, I got up and raised my hand. Yes, the little lady in the back with your hand up. Do you have a question? Yes, thank you. I'm concerned that thousands of natives are refused good medical care every month. Oh, every citizen of a tribal nation is entitled to receive health care services at an IHS hospital. There is no IHS hospital in Tucson. Of course not. Tucson is not a reservation. Okay? So there are Indians living in Tucson. Well, that's not an IHS concern. They're not living on a reservation. They're Indians. IHS only provides health care services to those who live on a reservation. Then why do you count us? I'm sorry? In the numbers you send to Congress. And when you request funding through appropriations, I've read the numbers, sir, and for the last 5 years, you've asked Congress for funding based on entire tribal populations. You count every tribal citizen regardless of whether they live on or off a reservation. Not too long after that, Johnson asked me to meet with him. In that meeting, he told me IHS would fund TIA to open up an urban Indian healthcare clinic for Indians living in Tucson. And that is how we opened the first urban healthcare clinic for natives living off reservation ever. One night I came home at midnight. The kids were asleep. Joy was sitting quietly by the front door. "Babe, you startled me." He handed me an envelope. "You've won the National Jefferson Award for Public Service." Jefferson, as in the president. The president who called us merciless Indian savages in the Declaration of Independence? That's the one. This award will be given in the United States Supreme Court at a ceremony officiated by a justice. Jean, this is a big deal. He was right. It was an award given by a group of top-flight folks, the Pulitzer Group, Supreme Court justices, Senator Robert Taft, Ethel Kennedy, Jackie Kennedy. Let's take the whole family to Washington. The boys need to be there. When you receive this award, they need to see it. And so they did. We packed up the car, we drove across the country, we made a family vacation of it. Joy took John to the Air and Space Museum. Paul, by this time, could read an entire book a day, and so we walked down to the Library of Congress, and he was in heaven. The next day, as we climbed the gigantic steps up to the Supreme Court, I turned to my children. This court decides very important cases that affect the entire nation. John responded immediately. So it's bad. No, I wouldn't say everything the United States does to us is bad. I swear, this kid had listened to every comment I made, every phone call I made, the comments I made to myself in the shower. He had picked up on my every critique. Honey, so far in U.S. history, that has pretty much been the way things have gone. This court has issued some harmful decisions that harm Sajatis, calling us racially inferior, savages and heathens, ignoring our treaties. Then why do you want to accept an award from them? I respect this court. Even though this court hasn't always respected us, my hope, my prayer, is that someday, maybe in your lifetime, they'll get it right. Someday, they'll respect us as a nation. I took my two boys' hands, and together with Joy, we entered the Supreme Court. And there we stood, a very brown family. On one side, a first-generation immigrant, and the other, a citizen of a nation that predates the United States on this soil by thousands of years. My fellow Americans, we are gathered here today to honor one of the most important offices an American citizen can hold, that of public service and sacrifice. Justice Byron White presented me with my award. Serving one's community is a bedrock of American democracy. Jean Hill Chaudhuri, a citizen of the Mvskoke Creek Nation, has spent her life in public service. I'm sure his speech was short, but to me it felt like forever. It is my honor to award the National Jefferson Award for Public Service to Jean Hill Chaudhuri. The justice gestured for me to step forward to the podium. Suddenly, and perhaps for the first time in my life, I was without words. I didn't know what to say. But then I heard my grandpa Scott. I heard my dad, Mama. Their voices filled my head, and so I sang the song that got us through our darkest of times. Weena, weena, hey-o, weena, hey-o, weena, hey-o, weena, weena, hey-o, weena, hey-o, weena, hey-o, weena, Ohio, weena, hey-o, weena, Ohio, weena, hey-o, weena, weena, hey-o, weena, hey-o, weena, hey-o. I was with him, all of them, when Justice White's voice brought me back into the room. Was that a Native song? Yes. My family sang that song on the Trail of Tears. I think that's the first time anyone sung a Native song here in the court. Life had plenty of challenges after that. Like everyone who'd come before me, I developed diabetes, but I didn't have time to think about that. Paul was preparing to graduate from high school, and it was time to think about college, something I never got to experience, but desperately wanted him to have. Joy and I, however, were bewildered. Our straight-A son, our brilliant boy, was not receiving any of the pamphlets or mailings from the top universities across the United States. Other parents bragged about the offerings their child had received, but Paul had received none. Then one day I got a call from the high school counselor. Paul was failing. He had straight Fs. He was not going to graduate. I lost my breath. I couldn't breathe. All of his report cards had straight As. But when Joy and I confronted him, he told us the truth. I've been forging my grades. Forging? You know, you can make an F look a lot like an A if you have the right pen with the right ink. Joy lost it. Paul fled to his bedroom and locked the door. And as a mother, you just can't help but think of the worst. I knocked on his door. Go away. Please, baby, I want to talk to you. Is Dad there? Just me. He opened the door. I can't do this. School? Life. And then he just opened up. You're Creek. Everyone who is Creek accepts you as Creek. But to them, I'm just a half-breed. I'm not full Creek, so I can't be Creek. And how can I be Bengali? Well, you're the captain of your chess team. I don't care about status. I know I can compete with them. I don't want to. Point is, Mom, you have no idea what it's like to be nothing, to be rejected by both sides of your culture. The Native kids at your clinic, they make fun of me because I'm Asian. I'm not even accepted by people who look like me. And you constantly tell us the story of the babies' heads getting bashed on the Trail of Tears. I get it. You want to inspire us to do something great because our people have survived so much, but I will never be enough. So what's the point? No matter what I do, I will never be enough. I was speechless. I had pushed so hard to give my sons a sense of who they are, who they come from. I wanted them to know we are not here by accident. Somehow, I had made them feel like they had to do something in today's world to prevent what happened hundreds of years ago. I realized more needed to be done to heal the wounds of our collective past, but how? How do you convince your children that they are enough? In '85, Joy was offered a job teaching at ASU, and so the family moved to Tempe. Paul turned the corner and graduated from high school. He began taking classes at ASU, where his father now taught. John was in high school and captain of his chess team. Richenda and Lance moved back in with us. We didn't have much money, but we had a ton of love. Little did I know, I was about to face the biggest challenge of my life. One morning, there was a knock at the door, and when I opened the door, there stood Elsie James, one of our community's most honored elders. I could tell this was no routine visit. She was here on a mission. Jean, we need to talk. Absolutely, come on in. She took 2 steps in, but didn't take off her shoes as she'd always done before. They're going to sell the school to a developer. Like the school I was forced to go to, native kids in Arizona were taken forcibly from their homes and sent to the Phoenix Indian School, where they were beaten if they did not speak English. Many celebrated the news that they wanted to close the school on the 100th year anniversary of its opening, but the motivation for the closure was hardly a reckoning with the sins of the past, and Elsie wanted me to fight it. You're a boarding school survivor. I was a runaway. So you understand. Will you help us? I couldn't say no. And let me tell you, it was war. We were up against a major Florida land corporation, the Collier Group. They were interested in a complex land swap whereby they would give up surface rights to swampland in South Florida that they cheaply acquired many decades ago. In exchange, the federal government would hand over the Phoenix Indian School property to the Colliers so they could build fancy multi-million-dollar rich whatevers for rich people to live and work in. Because the Phoenix Indian School was federal property, the exchange would only be possible through an act of Congress, and the Colliers had lots of money to lobby Congress. Elsie introduced me to a group of elders in the valley, all of them alumni who graduated from the school and did not want to see it torn down and transformed into a monument for the rich. So I did what I always did. I looked for allies and partners. I turned to the Intertribal Association in Phoenix, a nonprofit created by tribes in Arizona to advocate on tribal issues, and I spoke to their executive director. The association won't oppose the deal. What? The decision has been made. It's final. How much money did they give you? Oh, they didn't give me anything, but they donated money to the association for education. Education. Jean, think about it. If you promise to drop your opposition, I'm sure they'd fund a nonprofit of your choosing. I'm not a sellout. Don't embarrass us all, Jean. Accept the money and shut up. I didn't. We started our own nonprofit, the Native American Heritage Preservation Coalition. We mailed thousands of letters to Congress. I spoke before the Phoenix City Council on numerous occasions. We wrote letters to the editor. Richenda passed around pamphlets. I lost track of the hours, the days, the weeks. They melted into months. I was in battle. One night or early morning, I think it was 3 a.m., Joy came into the living room where I was feverishly stamping envelopes for letters to Congress. Time for bed, Jean. I have to finish these envelopes. Oh, you can finish them tomorrow. They need to be mailed tomorrow. You need your rest. I'm fine. You need to sleep. We still haven't convinced McCain. Well, you might not be able to. If we lose McCain, we lose the school. These are the final days. Congress is about to vote. This is our final chance. And then what? On to the next challenge? You can't live your life like every modern day challenge you face is a trail of tears. It's gonna catch up with you, Jean. Sooner or later, your body and our family will pay the price. I ignored him, and he went back to bed, and I worked all night. The next morning, having had no sleep, I marched right into Senator McCain's office. Mrs. Chaudhuri, it's wonderful to see you again. I see you brought the whole crew with you here today. Just a few of the alumni who attended Phoenix Indian School. We went around the room, and the senator listened intently as they each shared their stories of struggle and survival. And at first, I don't think the senator fully understood. We hear your concerns, but we're doing a good thing by closing this school. We agree that Indian children should not be forcibly taken, removed from their homes, taken from their families, and sent to this school. Well, You say you agree, but you are here today because you disagree. We disagree that these 73 acres of land should be commodified, developed. We want the property to be a park, a cultural center, the headquarters for a Native nonprofit that can provide community service to the Native population here in Phoenix. I understand there has been an offer of some money, a donation. We will not accept money. For us, this land is not a commodity to be exchanged. Did you go to this school? I was forced to go to a school just like it. I was beaten when I spoke my language. I was chased by dogs every time I ran away. And just like everyone sitting before you here today, I survived. But I carry my scars. We all do. And so does the land. The land that school sits on is sacred. Now, I'm sure the Collier Group offered you a significant campaign contribution. I'm sure you'd like to accept it. And if you did, I assure you, you would not be the first American politician to award Indian land to a group of white men seeking to make profits. Nor will you likely be the last. But before you do, I ask that you consider the men and women who came to visit you here today and the many more they represent. Please, Senator, don't bury them under a multi-million-dollar high-rise. He flipped. He opposed the exchange, and the school was transferred to a Native nonprofit to manage. We won. The elders were thrilled. The community celebrated. I was exhausted. Joy was right. I had pushed myself too far and too hard for too long. That summer, when Richenda and I got in my car to drive back to our reservation to attend Greencorn, I only made it 2 hours before I had to turn around and come back. I'd stubbed my toe, and I was worried because of the diabetes. I'd watched many a relative begin with a toe injury and end with an amputation. Richenda was very sweet and offered to drive on the way back, but I wouldn't let her. We drove all the way back to Tempe in silence. I think we both knew. It was the beginning of the end. When we got to the doctor's office in Phoenix, I felt a great deal of pressure on my chest. The doctor asked me if I felt sharp pain, and I said no, but it did feel like 1,000 horses were running across my chest. The doctor took a blood test and said nothing was wrong. He gave me an ointment for the ulceration at the bottom of my foot and told me to go home and rest. Turned out to be a tragically wrong and incompetent diagnosis. When I did not get better, Joy demanded to take me back, but by then it was too late. I had congestive heart failure. I was assigned a new cardiologist, and he told me I had less than 3 years to live. I was 57. Joy was devastated. Soon the ulceration at the bottom of my foot turned to gangrene, and the doctor amputated my foot, but the infection spread. Next, he amputated my leg to just below the knee. Suddenly, I had a prosthetic leg, and my heart was pumping at just above 10% capacity. But that didn't stop me. I started a prison counseling program where I and several others would offer prayer and counseling to Indian inmates in the Arizona State Prison System. I was a certified prison chaplain. On February 17th, 1997, I returned home from my prison work and was resting on our couch when John called from Ithaca, where he was in law school. We visited about his classes and how few natives there were there at the school, and I told him, I love you, and laid back down on the couch and fell asleep, never to wake up.
Train I'm on, you will know that I am gone. You can hear the whistle blow 100 miles.
Joy, John, and Paul returned to the far end, and they spread my ashes on the 40 where I was born, where Halloween died, where Grandpa Scott would tell his stories until late in the night, where my mama prayed and my daddy danced around the ceremonial fire that our ancestors carried until they reached the far end of the Trail of Tears. Joy had promised me, after the kids were grown and gone, after he had retired from ASU, I would get to go home. That journey just came sooner than I expected. 23 years after I returned to the far end, the state of Oklahoma asked the United States Supreme Court to issue a decision declaring that our Mvskoke reservation no longer existed. In McGirt versus Oklahoma, the Supreme Court said no. The Mvskoke Nation and our reservation are still here. We still exist. Justice Gorsuch began the opinion he authored with a simple phrase: on the far end of the Trail of Tears was a promise. I stood in that court. I sang in that court, and I prayed in that court. And although Justice Byron White was not there when the court issued its decision 43 years later, it was written by his former law clerk, Justice Neil Gorsuch. Did Justice White ever tell Neil what he had witnessed on that fateful day back in 1977? What began as a prayer before one generation manifested in the next. On the far end of the Trail of Tears was a promise. Grandpa Scott walked toward the promise. Mama and Daddy died long before the promise, but my boys, Paul and John, they're alive to see the promise. And just 7 years after I passed, my first grandchild was born, Sam. Then came Lila, Ross, Kano, and Hamati. Because of them, the United States can never eliminate us. Because of them, we will always be here on the far end. That is the promise.
Hallelujah.
Yeah.